Are you ready to say goodbye to the constant ups and downs of the artist income roller coaster? Whether you're a full-time artist who wants to increase and stabilize your income, a part-time musician who wants to go full-time, or a hobbyist who needs to fund your passion projects, this podcast will equip you with the tools, resources, and inspiration to make it happen. My name is Bree Noble. I'm a musician, best-selling author, and educator whose mission is to help musicians like you to increase the income you're already making and tap into new income streams so you can create a more diverse, stable, reliable income from music and finally ditch the starving artist mentality. Now let's dive into the Profitable Musician Show. Hello, everyone. This is Bree Noble, and I'm so excited to be here with you for the podcast. I am here with Kendall Cherry from the Candid Collective, and we are going to be talking about story. This is one of my favorite subjects. I love to talk about story because story is so powerful. Story is so important to us as musicians, as songwriters, as the way that we present our music. You know, story is everywhere. It's the way we market ourselves. So we're going to get deep into story today. But before we do that, Kendall, I would just love for you to share your background with them, how you got into being so focused on story and, you know, what you were doing when you were younger in relation to music.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'm so excited to be here and to be chatting about this. This is definitely one of the topics I normally am talking about storytelling all the time, but it's more in a business or marketing context. I'm really excited to kind of jam out, not to, pun intended here, but really talk about storytelling in relation to music, because it's just been one of the biggest things kind of throughout my life. And so I'll start with what I do today. So I am a ghostwriter. I write content for business owners. If you are on LinkedIn or you get an email newsletter from someone, I pretty much write content day in and day out, either from my own byline or on behalf of clients. But when I was younger, my dream job was to be a singer-songwriter, or more so a songwriter, and kind of took that path and was studying writing and all of the things so that I could be a ghostwriter of songs. So it's really interesting. I did the Nashville thing. I worked in the music industry when I was in college in several different types of jobs and roles, and was always writing, and ultimately did a different path. I did a corporate kind of communications path before starting a business as a ghostwriter. But I find that when I peel back the layers of what I do today, so much of it is the storytelling that I learned from songwriting. There have been times I've written like literal poems for clients in their newsletters or their content, which we all know I'm pretty much just writing a story. Some of my clients will tell me I'm like a slam poet, or some people have called me like K Diddy before, just as a joke.
You don't
So
want to be called
I
that anymore, huh?
yeah, not anymore. That one does not land, unfortunately. But I'm just kind of always had that very lyrical style of speaking, lyrical style of writing, which obviously informs the content writing that I do for clients. But so much of it, especially the storytelling, is something that I picked up really, really young and didn't really know, I'll say, like the inner workings of it. I never really formally studied it. It's just one of those things, you have these gifted children. It was always kind of something that came to me naturally. And especially because music for me was the vessel of kind of how I learned and studied it when I was
Mm.
younger.
Well, my husband is an English professor, a literature
Oh,
professor. And so, you know, we're always having this conversation of like, why are stories so compelling, right? Stories
mm.
that a lot of times you know are not real. Like,
Ooh,
what is it about stories that we hear, whether it's in a song or in a piece of literature or a poem or even just on a podcast, somebody telling a story? Like, what is so compelling about story?
yeah. I think for me, when I think about story, it's many things. I know for me, I've experienced, some of the highest highs and some of the lowest lows, regardless of kind of my path in life. And I always find story, regardless of the medium that it's coming through, it's always this bigger kind of universal truth that's being communicated. So some of my like most heartbreaking songs are written by artists I have nothing in common with, or the song isn't even necessarily about what I'm going through, but the universal kind of sharing the experience, sharing the energetics, zooming someone in on a really specific scene. Even it may not necessarily be, verbatim what I'm going through, but the tone of someone's voice, the words they're using to describe it. I find it's one of the most vulnerable ways we can communicate with each other, and yet it's one of the most universal ways for us to kind of connect on different levels, regardless of if we've had that experience or not. Especially, I write for clients, but I'm also a memoirist. And one thing that I've kind of learned and studied, so much of memoir writing, which is no different than, a song about your life is no different than a book about your life. So much of that process is about identifying what is it in your story that you want to highlight so that it can communicate some kind of universal truth, or universal exploration for someone else. And so that's why, a cancer memoir, right? If I read one of those, or if I hear a song about loss or something like that, the loss may not be exactly what I'm going through, but it's still one of those songs or those stories that still resonates because I have some common thing in between, whether that's the story, the experience, or it's just the feelings that I'm having that was intended by the writer or the author to really communicate so it feels the same.
Yeah, I think that's really true. Like I have this song that talks about being in the hospital and like being in the hospital
Mm.
for a long time and like really wanting to get out but still being too sick, that kind of thing. And just the
Mhm.
way I'm describing it about, the why can't I get out of bed? Like the blankets feel so heavy, like that kind of thing. And then
Mhm.
it resonated with a lot of people that had depression. And they would
Totally.
come up and tell me like, "Oh yeah, those lines really resonated with me." And I wasn't thinking about it that way when I was creating the song.
Totally.
But it's universal in that way. And so, we have things that we create and then they become like separate from us, right? It comes from our perspective, but then it becomes separate from us, a separate piece of art that then is affecting other people different ways. So how can we tell our stories in a way that they can jump off the page that way and not be like so specific that people aren't going to identify with them because they're just my story?
Yeah. I find kind of searching for what about the experience is universal in nature. So I have a really similar story from earlier in the year where I wrote a song. In my perspective, it was like my business was like not doing well at all. It was like one of those just like feast or famine seasons, and I was really struggling and going through it. And so I had this experience. It was about a friend of mine that I was really close with, and talking about, I mean, I zoomed in on the specifics. I talked about a conversation we had around the kitchen counter and saying, like, if you really knew like how lost I feel, like, would you still stay? Is kind of the energetics of what were going on. So I wrote it about a really specific thing, but just general enough. Posted it randomly, which I don't normally do. And I had a friend of mine reach out and be like, "Oh my God, I'm getting divorced." And this is like
Mm.
so exactly what I needed to hear. Like, this moved me to tears. And I'm over here like, I was talking about like someone I'm dating and like all these, it was not at all what I'd pictured it even being about. And I think the way when it comes to storytelling, it's that kind of candor and that honesty, and sitting with the hard feelings is the first part. That's the most uncomfortable part of the process. I find um, that is more of the emotional labor of any form of an artistic craft, is getting clear on like what hurts,
Mm.
and then being clear about what elements can you play with that are not going to necessarily, over specify this specific scene that you're trying to describe, or the emotion, etc. And I think understanding too, things like certain details, those can have a limiting effect on someone's perspective, but knowing when it's appropriate to use them to further communicate something and almost drop someone into the scene versus, letting those emotions or letting those words of what a feeling feels like kind of, talk for you in that instance.
Right. Like if I were to describe my hospital gown or, the type of bed that I was in
Chewing
or the
chewing
scene or
ice
whatever,
chips. Yeah,
right?
chewing
That
ice
wouldn't
chips
work.
probably not gonna land, right? But like heavy blankets or
Right.
being afraid to say that you're still hurting. like telling a nurse coming in and like having to pretend like you're fine because you want to get out, 'cause you're
Mm.
tired of feeling like this. Like there, and it takes such um a very intentional process to not just write the song and kind of keep moving, but making sure that each line or each verse really is if you're going to get a snapshot, I always kind of think of it as like, we can't say everything, right? We just don't have enough words or we'd be here for forever. So if you can only give, in a memoir, it would be a chapter or a couple of paragraphs. In a song, it's a line or a couple of verses. What are the things that are really going to make this feel complete and like a complete experience, but also leave enough ambiguity where I think the best writing is the kind of writing that ages really, really well. And you can read it or hear it, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and then you listen to it again today and it has a whole different meaning, whether that's from wordplay or, you're in a different perspective now than you were back then. I think that's some of the strongest writing is that universal nature and ability to kind of talk to anyone at any given point, even if it's the same person and it's, 10 years later or however long. I think that's how classics are made.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I'm sure there's songs that I heard, in the 80s and now I hear them and I hear them so differently. Now I'm
Totally.
a mother or something. And so I'm thinking about them from a different perspective. It's definitely true about like when I think about things that when I was a teenager, the way I think about it, like maybe it was raunchy or maybe it was rebellious or whatever. And now I'm thinking
Mhm.
about it from the perspective of being a
Oh,
mother.
you're like, too much.
Like, no, no, like why was I ever thinking this was a good idea?
Yep. Yep.
That's funny. So about being a ghostwriter, because I think that really is very similar to being a songwriter,
Mhm.
in that you're trying to tell a story and other people are going to experience it.
Mhm.
How do you like do you have any like checks and balances or whatever to make sure that you've taken yourself out of it?
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting process. And I do find like the clients that seek me out, there are lots of different ghostwriters. So I find people who read either my work or other clients' work. There's definitely a certain tone to the way that I write. It's very candid, it's very visceral, it's very direct. So you should not come to me if you're like, super soft and wanting like flowers. Like I usually get people who are like, I have some hot takes, like I have some big swings I want to make. So first that makes it a little easier. Like the tone in general is kind of similar to mine. But the thing I think about the universal experience of ghostwriting, and I think that's what creates the kind of nuance and kind of multi-layered experience, similar to what we've talked about. So much of my work is not just taking what the client is saying and the story that they're trying to tell and telling it on their behalf, but also making sure, my role as the ghostwriter is to make sure I'm infusing as much of that universal experience into it as I can. So whether that's, someone's telling me about, I was writing for a client this week. She does more like financial services, uh, coaching, consulting, teaching on financial literacy. Not every person that's in her program is going to have, a huge portfolio and, tons of money and bankrolling and all of those things. There's so many different layers of perspective. And so making sure, I say her part of the story, but include other examples or small little golden nuggets so that no matter who's reading the piece, it still resonates with them based on, in that example, I have tons of money and I'm just trying to make more, or maybe I'm a little bit earlier on in my wealth journey and I'm still trying to learn, maybe basic budget stuff, or I'm just starting to learn about robo investing or anything else. Like it's so much about making sure to not just portray the story as like, first this happened, then this happened. It's also layering in that more psychological experience and the universality of what the people that are going to be in your community or in your inner circle or your customers or in your audience, if you're a musician, making sure that everyone in that room or virtual room, if it's online, everyone is going to get something to take away from them. And that's kind of my general school of thought, whether it's an email or a piece of content or, a song or whatever else, poem. I want to make sure that everyone, no matter their experience that they're having, there's always something in it for everyone, regardless of, they're the perfect ideal
Mm.
audience member, or there's something, maybe they're a little bit outside of the edge, but there's some bit of wisdom, there's some bit of, self-acknowledgement, empowerment acknowledging of their feelings. There's always something that someone can gain from whatever I'm writing.
Yeah, I think that has to be there. And, I'm thinking back to like kind of my one woman show that I did. And there was a lot of stories there leading into the songs. And like I said, like when I talked about being in the hospital, and then there are people that in the audience that have been in the hospital, like they're really getting it, right? But then there's
Yeah,
plenty of people that haven't been, but they can really identify for some other reason. So somehow it has to be universal enough that you don't lose everybody. People aren't
totally.
just like, oh, well, I'm tuning this part out. So
Yeah, totally.
that seems
Yeah,
like a really hard line to walk, maybe. But then when I think about my one woman show, I'm thinking about, I was using the stories to kind of sell the song in a way, to like lead
mhm,
into the song, to get
totally.
them to
Yes.
hook them in, right? And be like, okay, now you're really going to want to listen to the song. And I find that when they did that, then they'd be like back at the merch table going, where can I get that song? Because they're connected with it, right?
Mhm.
So let's talk about like how artists can use story on the stage. Do you have
Totally.
any tips for them?
Totally. So the best one, this is something that I teach as well, just in my regular day to day, and it's probably the most true for musicians. One of the most, I'll say like the highest converting, quote unquote, which still counts if you're going to a merch table. That's a conversion. It's the same thing. But um, one of the first ones that I teach is called the origin story, and so I think in songwriting in particular, it's the fastest entry point for a musician to be able to say, hey, here's where I was at when I wrote this song. And then the trick here, and this is kind of a learned skill, so you've got to practice it, but it can become muscle memory at this point. I've been doing it slowly. If you were to listen back, I do it when I speak now, but you can say that origin story, but the quickest trick to having that moment of like, oh my gosh, they're talking to me. Everyone I think thinks, oh, if I just say like, most people, dot, 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 or they, or I was talking to these people, and it's this very broad audience, the faster you can switch to saying you and just switch that into your vocabulary, that is going to be the thing where it feels like it's a one-to-one conversation, whether you're standing in front of a room of 20 people or 2,000 people or whoever, however many. And so for an example, just to get kind of practical, tangible with it, like if I had a song about um, we'll do the hospital one because that's probably the easiest. Like, my name is Kendall. You might not know this about me, but a few years ago, I was in the hospital for a really long time. And I don't know if you've ever felt like that, but for me, it felt like XYZ.
Mhm.
But maybe for you, it felt like ABC. And the faster you can kind of switch into incorporating some of your story, but switching the language so that it includes that you, it's the fastest entry point to people, and also being able to kind of spread again that universal experience. So you could say, I don't know if you've ever been in the hospital, or maybe you've had a family member that's been there, or maybe you just felt like you couldn't get out of bed one day. If and one of the other tricks that I love to do in my own writing is like, I'll say like, I wrote this for you, mic drop, start the song. You could do something like that. But I always find like kind of using those examples and infusing, suggesting, this was the direct experience, but here's a couple of, again, those kind of gray area things. And then just saying, I wrote this for you, is one of the best ways. It's more of a, I think in the artistic trade and craft, it's all about kind of releasing the piece of art to
Mhm.
resonate in the way that it's going to with the people. It's kind of an ego thing. Like it's our story, we want to hold it close. It's our song, we want to hold it close. It's, whatever. But there is this moment where the moment you release it to this, higher power, whatever you want to call it, away from the source material, it allows people to really translate it and apply it to their own lives. And so I find, again, I wrote this for you. This song is for you, however you want to use it. You can't use it for every song at every show. So use sparingly, use it on the real tear jerkers or the really, your best ones that you really feel kind of resonate like that. But I find that kind of artistic release is the one of the things, whether it's on the stage or maybe just even in the writing process, detaching from the meaning is also a really big part of the trade and the writing process as well.
Yeah, and I think it's permission for the audience because I do think sometimes, we as artists write songs as therapy. And then it can
Yeah.
kind of feel like this private moment on stage where the audience are like, I don't know if we should be listening to this. You know what I
This feels
mean?
like a diary with
Yeah.
audio.
So just giving them here I'm handing this to you,
Hmm.
use it as you will kind of
Totally.
thing.
Yeah, totally.
Well, this is the profitable musician, so we definitely need to talk about story as a way to help us make money. And I
Yes.
know, you work with a lot of people in marketing and you kind of talk about like there are only 5 stories that you need to tell to be able to sell anything. So I want you to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so I have kind of this, it just comes from years of being in different levels of digital marketing. I've worked for really, really big brands with, almost 1 million followers. I've written for really small brands as well. And I find that the trick to selling, it's so true with artists. Like we grow up, for me, the starving artist narrative was, you can't make money as a writer. Well, for a musician, it's you can't make money as a musician, right? We've all seen the people, what I can't think of the name of it right now, but it's the people, the buskers, right? We've seen
Yes.
we've seen, buskers with their guitar cases open at the bottom of a subway, and you're never going to make it, and it's this big grind. And so there's this very collective narrative, the starving artist narrative that says it's, if you're an artist, you're not going to make a lot of money. So, that's the decision that you make. And so much of my work is about helping artists, not just writers, not just musicians, but people that have artistic souls and spirits really figure out how to make money doing the thing that is the most authentic to you, that you've likely also been doing since you were very, very, very young. So it's something so natural to you, just like you can't imagine doing anything else. And so I find that storytelling, there comes to be this moment with this starving artist thing. There's like this weird like ego battle internally where you're like, it's like, ugh, like I have to sell, but it's art, but I have to sell to make it work. Like, and I gotta, feed myself and feed my cats. Like, what are we gonna do here? And so I find that storytelling for people who are sensitive, they are artistic, maybe authenticity is really important to you and integrity is really important to you. I find that storytelling is the easiest way to really soften the idea of selling. You don't have to just be, this greasy used car salesman that's going to like push and push and push and push. Like you can kind of let your story be the thing that allows you to sell without feeling like you're selling. And so I have kind of 5 stories that I typically recommend. They may resonate. There's maybe one that I think might get a little weird for musicians, but the first one we already talked about, which is the origin story. How did this song come to be? Why did you become a songwriter or a musician? Like, take us back to a time when you were really, really little. Maybe you had a certain mentor when you were growing up who was really impactful for you. Maybe talk about a time you totally flopped on the stage and it changed your perspective on like how you approach your music or your craft. So the first one is the origin story. Then there's one called A Day in the Life. This one is more about your ideal customer or your audience member. And it kind of depends for the musician if it's for the audience or maybe you're trying to sell, your song to a record label or whoever else. But the day in the life is really talking through for the other person. What would a day in the life look like if they were to have it their way and they had all of the success in the world? What would a day in that life look like? And then there's the opposite of like, what would a day in the life look like if you keep living the way you're living, or you don't have everything solved, like you still have these pain points and these things kind of going on. So there's that one. The other one, I'm trying to think now, I don't have them in front of me. The other one is more around like hot takes and unpopular opinions. These are the things that are um, a little more spicy, a little more, they'll really differentiate you from other artists,
Yeah,
whether
this is
that's
like leaning into your brand.
leaning into your brand, really leaning into what matters to you. We'll see, I'll use the country music industry, for example. There are certain artists who are a little bit more liberal, maybe a little bit more putting drag queens on stage than other people in the industry. I'll say that. And so really letting that become your brand and kind of what you're known for. Other things being just your past experience as well. What whether it's a personal, hospital stay or loss of someone or, becoming a new parent or whatever else. And then the last one is it's in the marketing space, it's usually your kind of client testimonials or people that you've worked with who've really enjoyed, your experience. So for musician, this could look like, maybe you play a private gig, like maybe you're someone who does, weddings or something like that, telling the story of maybe some of your clients or customers who you've worked with who really, had a really special day, or maybe you wrote a custom song for them, or you really went out of your way to make the music perfect and really worked with them to create the perfect ambiance using the music, using those kind of client stories as the thing that also showcases what you're doing and what other people see as valuable versus you having to stand, on your soapbox being like, I matter, I'm valuable, like buy my stuff. I find sometimes it's easier to use other people's words when describing you than sometimes trying to sit and figure out, how do I sell myself? How do I make this something that is profitable versus, sitting and trying to sell yourself.
Yeah, I had one that I used to tell when I was a senior in high school. I was on tour with our church choir and we went to sing at a Marine base. And
Oh,
I
that's a
had the
great
solo.
entry point.
I had the solo at the end of the show, and there's all these guys in the audience going, hoo, 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 and
God.
I'm up there just by myself, like ready, trying to sing over all these people. And as soon as I sang like three notes, the entire room hushed.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, that's cool. Like that's the power of music and stuff. And so, you can tell something like that, or I could tell a story about when I, got to sing at Dodger Stadium, sing the national anthem, like that's like cred building, but it's not me
Totally.
saying, look how awesome I am.
Yeah,
Not
totally. I
quite.
find it's the same in marketing as well. Like I find whether it's like using a specific experience that someone else has had when working with you, or your perspective of having, I'll say like a pinch me kind of moment. They can
Mhm.
be really, really big things, or they can be really small things, but those are really great entry points. Again, they not only connect with people, but they kind of share your credibility, share your authority as well, without being, it's you don't want to be the person that's like, here's all of my trophies. Like, please let me tell you the play-by-play for every single one. Like, no one would care. But the moment you introduce a story, even if you are a little bit humble bragging, it's not, okay, they're gonna come through here and just like, they're gonna be that person. No one really wants, somebody that's braggy, but somebody I think who is humble and can, subtly sell is a lot, a lot smarter of a sales strategy in my opinion.
Yeah, and I've always struggled with the desire and pain point one with
Yeah.
musicians because it doesn't quite line up.
Yeah.
And I've tried for years to try to figure out how can we make this work for musicians, and it doesn't quite fit unless you're doing something where you're teaching or
Mhm.
you've got a course or you're I don't know, doing even maybe custom songs or something like that where you can and show how awesome it would be if they had
Mhm.
this song for their wedding anniversary or something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's been one that's been hard for me to translate from regular marketing, but all the other
Totally.
ones absolutely translate for musicians.
Yeah. I would say the one thing that is interesting, it depends on the room, but um one thing with the pain point marketing, at least for musicians, something that comes up is kind of, I always try and think about like your unique value proposition. And for musicians, it's so like fascinating. But there are a lot of like monetary and non-monetary assets. If you're still a business, you're just kind of a different style of business. So there are other assets, like if you are in a certain market for a specific venue, like, if I were an Austin musician and I have a customer base, aka an audience that exists in Austin, I that is something that I do bring to the table. So if I'm going to maybe a venue that doesn't typically sell out, or if I have a pretty loyal fan base, those pain points, if I were to pitch myself to, play a specific venue, that is something that I could say, on a Tuesday night, you guys are pretty, it's hard for you to sell a show, but I have, because I have my core of people, I bring a certain level of audience. It's not just your marketing that I'm relying on, it's also the audience that I've built. So I think musicians, it's still a business, and there's so many valuable assets that you can be creating in the background, especially if you're a local musician, or there's some locality to what you're doing, whether it's, maybe you're doing wedding stuff, or maybe you are playing, just smaller venues in a city. There's a lot you can do with building up your own assets, whether that's your audience in your city or having some level of value in one of the many ways that exists. That I think it kind of brings the empowerment back to you versus having to rely on the venue or other marketing channels. Like it's much better to be like, well, when I play a show, 100 people show up, or however many people show up, versus whatever you guys are going to come with. So
Yeah,
I
that
find that
makes sense.
too.
And I mean, we're marketing on all sides, right? So we have to market to get the gig. And then when we're at
Totally.
the gig, we're marketing to the fans to make them more to
Yeah.
want to buy stuff and make them super fans and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Marketing is all around us for sure.
Totally.
But like maybe you can help draw the through line for those listening and watching from the way we use story in marketing to how that actually helps sell things, how that helps there's a lot of versions of sell, right? Sell could be someone becomes a super fan and then they're going to support you for years to come. Sell could be
Right.
they bought something from the merch table. That means could mean they hired you for another gig. There's so many ways that we sell.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I would say, at least in that context, the way I would think about selling is it's basically someone who has bought into the business of you, whatever the revenue stream is. And the way I think about this, it's the same thing I approach even in my business as a ghostwriter. I get people who maybe buy a really small, we'll call it an entry offer. For a musician, maybe that's a t-shirt, or maybe that's just a ticket, right? Something small. But over time, if they have a good experience the first time, um, they're much more likely, it's the lifetime value of your customer. They're much more likely to come back a second time, or they're much more likely once they buy the first, CD or single, they're going to come back and probably get the second one, especially if they get on your email list or some other channel where you're continuously kind of keeping them in the loop. If it's social media, the same thing. And so what I find is, not that we don't want to be selling all the time, but like you get micro purchases over time that I think is what, everyone wants the super fan status, of course. That's the most lucrative. And even in my business, right? That's the same thing is true. But there is a buyer journey or a customer journey that exists. And you may not get, super raving fans your very first night that someone sees you, or the very first time that they listen to your single or your song, or however else they find you. Maybe they see a video of yours on TikTok or Instagram. But getting them into your world, I call it in my business, my cinematic universe, right? I bring them into my world and I kind of share, more over time using those stories, whether it's the story about why you created a song, or maybe it's why you designed the t-shirt in a certain way, or maybe you have a certain logo for your band. In anything like this is really important, because the more that you're telling those stories, you're not just some random person that they found. Again, they were at the venue at the right time, or they saw a random video one day and then that was it. I find that the thing that really creates audience retention, which then mirrors customer retention, is the storytelling. And maybe the first time they ever see your story from you, or the 20th time they see a story, they're like, oh, that was an interesting thing. Maybe they don't necessarily buy automatically and right then, but they're going to remember you. And it's less about converting right in the moment, as scary as that sounds, right? Like we all want to make money as soon as possible, but you have to also keep in mind you're building a brand. You also have to play the long game. And those moments over time, those that being, it's the same thing we hear in hooks and in stories and those earworms. It's the same idea. It's just with stories and with sales, those things that people kind of keep thinking about with like, oh my gosh, that person said that one story. You'll be remembered. And that is the thing that creates not just conversion, but to me, retention, which is the most important thing to building a brand. Because you could have someone, buy all your stuff, and then yes, you get all the conversions, but it's likely if you're a musician, you want them to buy the first album and then buy the second one and the third one and the fourth one, and come to every show that you've got. So that's what I find to be like why the storytelling is so important, is that retention aspect.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that was basically just a master class in marketing that we just
Sorry,
had. So
guys.
that's all. No, I love it. I love it. This is my jam as well.
Good,
So
good. I know I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna nerd out.
no, no, no. I love it. That's exactly what we're here for. So if they want to hear more of this nerding out on marketing from you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I write a newsletter every week. It's called Wallflower Fridays. So it's basically a newsletter that's all about how to monetize your audience by telling more stories that sell. And it's really, really similar if you're looking for, uh, again, origin stories and examples from my own life. I'll talk about clients, but I talk about a lot of these sales and marketing topics that, if you didn't go to business school or you're looking for a little bit more of a modern take on how to sell without uh, the way I write it in my services guide, it's not the traditional, pretty fly for a white guy sales topics that we've all heard and maybe not so much loved. If you're someone that's really looking for authenticity and integrity when you're selling, that is what I write about every week. And so again, that newsletter is called Wallflower Fridays. Just imagine me being a little wallflower, absorbing all of the everything I'm seeing, and then I write about it. Always about sales, always about marketing and monetizing. But you can go to wallflowerfridays.com and sign up there.
So
But
definitely not bro marketing. Love
it could not be more opposite of bro marketing. It's not even anti-bro marketing, like bro isn't even in the title.
it. God, I
Like
love
not even, we just don't even associate.
I love it. Well, you guys go check out Wallflower Fridays. It's hard to say. It's so is profitable musician. So I get that.
Yeah, it's
I
the
can't even
F's,
say my
man. It's
own.
the F's and the L's.
Uh-huh.
It's a mouthful, but
It's
that's
Wallflower Fridays. Check that out,
Wallflower
you
Fridays.
guys. And thank you so much, Kendall. This has been so good. And it was exactly what I was hoping for to really
Yeah.
just get musicians to understand how important story is, how important to weave it into everything that you do and have it become second nature. Like you said, just even thinking and using the word you and having it become second nature is going to be such a
Yeah,
great way to connect with your audience. So you guys take everything that she
totally.
said to heart today and try to implement that in what you're doing with your fans.
Thanks for listening to the Profitable Musician Show. I would love to know your takeaways and aha moments from this episode. Leave me a comment over at profitablemusician.com so I can bring you more of the information, interviews, and resources that you love. Thanks to Rondi Fay, one of my Academy members, for providing the music for our podcast. You can check her out at rondifay.com. That's RANDIFAY.com. Just remember, knowledge is power, but without implementation, it is useless. And inspiration without action is merely entertainment. But I know you're not just a dreamer, you are a doer. And I promise I'll be here every week to support you and remind you that you can be a profitable musician.